Chapter 32 Assassination by Hydesgrain. Standing up within the bush, Jason made himself some space to dash out immediately when both would appear. Jason could sense Artemis' astonishment. Afterward, he felt that she used large amounts of her mana to enhance her wings in order to accelerate her flying speed. Jason grew worried, but he told himself that he had to remain calm as Artemis' plumage could be seen from far away. She was at least 20 meters high in the sky, while below her Jason could see green bison pursuing her on the ground. The bison was enveloped by a light green mana, roaring enraged. Shooting out wind blades towards Artemis, she had to use her utmost efforts to evade them, which was barely possible. Artemis threw stones at the bison and made fun of it, which made the bison extremely furious. Following and attacking the flying beast pleased the bison as it was reassured once again that it was the overlord in this area. It knew that the small beast could only endure the onslaught of wind blades for a few minutes at most before it would be exhausted. The small wind blades it used didn't take much of its mana because of the bison's mutation, which it instinctively figured out. Completely without a single thought of protecting itself, the bison stared at the sky, not looking at what happened in front of it as it bypassed a big green bush. Suddenly the bison felt a painful sting at its right side as it grew weaker when its legs couldn't handle the bison's weight anymore before it collapsed. Turning its head, the bison saw a long red stripe with white bones sticking out of its body, caused by a jade-green dagger that stuck on its hindleg. The bison's whole side was torn apart, blood and organs spilling out of the huge laceration caused by the dagger. Crying out in pain once it saw a youth squeezed himself out of the bush, the bison felt enraged. With its last efforts, it gathered the remaining mana inside it to shoot out a wind blade. Jason was still completely on guard against his first opponent with an elemental affinity. However, he was still only barely able to evade the wind blade as the blade's draft blew away his hair. Artemis dived down in rage after Jason was attacked, only to pierce into the bison's eyes with its sharp talons. Immediately afterward, the weight of the white beast vanished once the bison died without taking revenge on any of its attackers. Jason was astonished that his plan worked out so easily, causing him to sigh in relief. The only thing that worried him was the fact that the wind blades were faster than he expected while Artemis was almost hit by some of them. Still, the bison was way too full of itself as it didn't even notice Jason jumping out of the bush, tearing apart the bison's whole side with his dagger. Sometimes even a hunter might be hunted, and one should never feel too safe anywhere. Jason ran to the dead body, only to see Artemis picking out the slightly green incomplete core which he instantly took out of her talons. The amount of mana inside this core was almost at the awakened rank and he didn't want Artemis to eat this core. Otherwise, who knows how long he had to wait for her to wake up. There was not much time left, as he had to hunt another 4 5-star wild beasts. However, he had to rely on Artemis for that. Artemis' mana replenishing process was relatively fast while she sat on Jason's shoulder. Jason strived around carefully to look out for some lone 5-star wild beasts. His luck couldn't be considered good as he walked around until afternoon, even neglecting his Heaven's Hell practice, only to find nothing. Not a single solo 5-star wild beast was in his sight. He saw many larger groups of youth within the mid and a few peak novice ranks fighting a large group of 5-star wild beasts. Finally, Jason's luck paid off. Seeing a group of youths overwhelming a pack of 5-star greater horned wolves, Jason rejoiced. They split up and an injured wolf headed his way. Jason was still approximately 100 meters away from the whole battle. He was delighted seeing that the youths pursued other wolves while the particular wolf who ran to him was alone. Deciding to hide behind a tree, he waited for the perfect moment to ambush the wolf. Seeing the wolf running past the tree, Jason gathered enough mana in order to push his speed to the limit in the shortest amount of time, thrusting out with his dagger, cutting through the unaware wolf's neck. The whole assassination took less than a second and it was only possible because the wolf was foolishly running along the bush, not caring about any possible danger. Not knowing what happened, the wolf collapsed on the ground, with its eyes turning dim in a short amount of time. Storing the corpse without further delay, Jason vanished from the spot. Only half a minute later, a few youths found the spot where the greater horned wolf was killed, looking down at the green patch of grass that was stained with fresh blood. These youths were all at least a year younger than Jason, but they were already at the 8th novice rank, which indicated their strength. One youth with particular looked at the blood-stained grass patch. Jason was running far away with a big radiant smile on his face. Only 3 out of 5 beasts had to be hunted down, and Jason had still time until 2 days later, when he had to meet Greg. He didn't think that he would find a lone 5-star wild beast until the evening, which was only around 2 hours away. But even so, he continued his journey around the wild zone. Artemis circles around him in the air, looking out for possible targets. Suddenly, around half an hour later, something that both of them didn't expect happened. Above Artemis, the sky turned dark with a weird sensation approaching her, as she looked above, only to see a huge vulture diving down. Horrified, Artemis cried out and also dived down with a 90-degree angle, only to evade the vulture's talons by a hair length. Noticing Artemis feeling horrified, he heard her crying out as he looked above. There he saw Artemis diving towards him as the vulture pursued her. The vulture was heavier and thus way faster with its dive than Artemis, and Jason knew that the vulture would catch up to Artemis only a few moments later. He made up his mind and utilized the only thing he could think of. Gripping his dagger firmly, Jason pulled his arm back as he aimed with his other hand, following the trajectory with one finger. Injecting half of his mana into the arm that held the dagger, Jason threw the dagger with a loud shout. Jason knew he couldn't instantly kill the vulture, causing him to aim at the biggest part of the vulture, that was the abdomen. But even so, he was still slightly off as the dagger pierced into the vulture's wing. The impact from the flying dagger changed the course of the vulture dive. Noticing that, Artemis felt as if a stone was plucked from her small and tender heart as she continued her dive until she reached Jason. She looked extremely horrified, as if she was completely out of her wits, and Jason had the urge to cuddle her. However, he was unarmed and the vulture which landed slightly apart from them. With his mana eyes activated, he figured out that the vulture was a 5-star wild beast. Jason saw the dagger stuck deep into the vulture's wing, which made him sigh in relief as he had at least injured it slightly, causing its best advantage to discard. It couldn't fly with the dagger in its wing, but its razor-sharp beak and talons were still more than threatening to the unarmed Jason. Both Artemis and Jason were only faster than the injured vulture with some mana as enhancement, but they shouldn't underestimate their sole opponent, as the vulture's physique and strength were still much higher than theirs. Because he had no weapon to defend himself, Jason had to envelop his hands with a thin layer of mana in order to prevent them from being cut off or seriously injured. Another major issue was that Artemis was injured. Chapter 33: Fighting with One's Life at a Thread by Hydesgrain. Artemis was filled with adrenaline and couldn't feel the pain at the moment, but that would change as soon as their fight ended. They had to defeat the vulture as fast as possible so Jason could treat Artemis' injury. Because of its inability to fly, the vulture's actions were rather passive than aggressive, which surprised Jason a little bit, forcing him to make the first move. Running away wouldn't be feasible because the vulture was probably still faster than Jason. Trying it out would be suicidal. The vulture was around 10 meters away from him, and Jason went slowly closer until he reached the distance of 4 meters. There he smoothly but exceptionally fast changed his stance, only to make a big stride forward, with his body leaning forward. After making a single stride, Jason sidestepped to avoid the incoming swing of the vulture's uninjured wing while Artemis shrieked out from above. She dived down and made a riot, causing the vulture to feel distracted from the white beast's shriek, as it turned its head upwards to welcome the diving beast. Surprisingly, the attack didn't come from above but from the front. He delivered a quick but impactful punch onto the vulture's head. While one mana-enveloped fist punched out, the other hand tried to take the jade iron dagger out of its wing in order to make the following process easier for them. Unfortunately, the dagger didn't completely loosen up. Shaking its head, the vulture was now injured as it could only see a blurry image. Due to the injury, the vulture was enraged, and seeing the blurry youth only a step away from it, the vulture tried to hit it with its claws. Jason rolled away, but he wasn't completely uninjured as his back was grazed by the razor-sharp claws. Ignoring the pain, Jason saw that the dagger began to loosen due to the vulture's sudden movement, and the additional gravity did its job, causing the dagger to fall out of the vulture's wing. Seeing that, Jason first evaded the vulture's beak, before suicidal jumping straight forward towards the dagger. The vulture didn't expect that and turned around, but it was distracted due to Artemis' second dive, straight at its back. Her mana-infused talons weren't even able to pierce through the vulture's plumage. The vulture was still annoying, but it decided to treat Artemis as annoying and not worth its attention. Focusing solely on Jason, however, was probably the vulture's biggest mistake. While Jason reached his dagger, with the vulture pursuing him, Artemis used her wings to reach the vulture's head that wasn't covered by plumage. Using her whole reserves of mana on her claws, she pierced out with them. It wasn't enough to heavily injure the vulture or even kill it, but it cried out in pain, causing it to shake the whole body vigorously, which gave Jason enough time to pick up his dagger and stab out with it. Piercing into the vulture's body, the plumage hindered the attack slightly, but it still penetrated its defense and met fresh meat. Upon piercing through it, a painful cry resounded throughout the area caused by the vulture. Jason's ears ached and he was tempted to cover them with his hands. Twisting the dagger, the painful shriek became louder until it disappeared after a few moments. Sensing the life force within the vulture disappearing and the following result, its death, Jason fell on his butt as he was way too exhausted to even stand firmly on the ground. The whole battle didn't take a long time, at most 2 minutes, starting from the vulture's surprise attack, but his mind calculated hundreds of possibilities, adding to the tension. Artemis' injury and him being unarmed exceeded Jason's capabilities. His body was still fine except for the small injury on his back, and blood was still flowing out of it. Getting up, Jason stored the vulture's corpse away when Artemis gliding to him with some difficulties. After the battle, Artemis almost immediately felt the injury on her back, hindering her flying ability slightly. Placing herself on Jason's shoulder, and both left the wild zone as fast as possible to avoid fighting anyone while being exhausted. 30 minutes later they entered the dome once again. The sun was going down while a little bit of sunlight combined with the light from the mansion-sized tents brightened up the surrounding. Many youths were sitting around a campfire talking to each other as Jason passed them without greeting anyone or even paying attention to them. Unknowingly to him, Jason was the person the youths talked about after seeing him entering the dome. His face looked beautiful, almost feminine if his detailed facial features wouldn't say otherwise, as the big golden eyes were illuminated by the surrounding lights, underlining Jason's return. Jason's black hair was disheveled, and his clothes were tattered and dirty, giving him the appearance of a wild boy. Sensing his and Artemis' mana, they found out that he was extremely weak even compared to them, with Jason radiating the mana of a 5th novice rank, and Artemis was obviously a 2-star wild beast. The youths wondered if the golden-eyed boy looked like this because of a battle against a 3-star wild beast and started laughing at him. How could they know that quasi 5th novice rank mana fluctuations were in reality a 3rd novice rank that fought suicidal against 3 5-star wild beasts and killed them, even if the whole fighting process was full of tricks and hidden assassinations? These youths would only dare to do something like that when they reached the 8th or 9th novice rank, and even then, only with superior weapons and armors to protect themselves. Most of them would still be accompanied by a guard or some other teammates to help them out if they end up in a disadvantage. Entering his tent, he put some medicine on Artemis and his wound. While he bandaged his own wound, he let Artemis' wound uncovered. He wasn't exactly sure how deep the wound was, but the area of her injury was at a bad spot. As such, he decided to give Artemis all the 2-star cores he had accumulated in addition to the 3 5-star wild beast cores he had left, in order to accelerate the healing process of Artemis with the huge amount of mana she could digest. She would probably sleep a few days, but it was still fine. Unfortunately, he had to kill another 2 5-star wild beasts until the day after tomorrow, but he shouldn't force Artemis into a fight with an injury, which could end up in devastating result. Artemis gulped down the calls before she went into the soul world to digest the overwhelming mana. Meanwhile, Jason ate some meat, and afterward, he also went into the soul world to practice the Heaven's Hell technique before he washed up and slept. Chapter 34 Rescue by Hydesgrain. After waking up early in the morning, Jason had to think carefully about his plans for the next 30 hours. Without Artemis, his chances to hunt a 5-star wild beast reduced drastically, and Jason wasn't confident to kill one with his current strength. His injury wasn't deep and wouldn't hinder his movements, but his strength was the biggest problem, right at this moment. Thinking carefully, Jason decided to use the remaining energy inside the Mana Stone to force a breakthrough of his rank. Throughout the last 2 weeks, he had stabilized his Mana Core, and in a week at most, he would be able to enter the 4th novice rank naturally without issues, but he didn't have that time right now. The small Mana Stone Jason had still left was half filled, which was probably enough to force a breakthrough in his rank. After forcing a breakthrough, his energy would be quite unstable for a while before he could advance again, but it was his best option at the moment. Once he advances, his physique and Mana Core would grow in size, and he would be one step closer to the strength of a 5-star wild beast. Jason sat down, but before he would break through, he still followed his daily routine and entered the soul world to practice the Heaven's Hell technique. Due to his determination to practice the soul technique 3 times a day, his soul energy increased slowly but steadily, and Jason was hopeful that he would be able to get a soul energy of 4 before Artemis advanced again. Leaving the soul world, he took the Mana Stone in both hands before releasing the remaining stored mana at once. A small storm of thin mana enveloped Jason as his pores opened instinctively. Absorbing the whole mana in his surrounding greedily, Jason's Mana Core ached, and it looked quite bad as his eyes turned red when drops of blood sprinkled the sleeping bag he was sitting on. Blood flowed out of his orifices while his head turned red. The amount of mana he absorbed was almost too much for him to handle at the moment when the Mana Core forcefully accepted the mana and increased in size. The core, however, could only slowly enlarge its size, while Jason had to endure the painful pressure for quite a long time. Fortunately, due to the enlargement of the Mana Core, the pressure grew weaker over time, and after an hour Jason could handle the pressure without any problems. His body was enveloped by a white cocoon, and only when his Mana Core reached the 4th novice rank, it slowly dissolved, while his physique also followed suit. Because of Artemis' additional amplification, Jason had a Mana Core of a larger size, and it was almost comparable to the 6th novice rank, while his physique was at the 5th novice rank. He was still much weaker than average 5-star wild beasts, but his chances to kill one with a crafty assassination or some other tricks increased a lot. Eating a small breakfast, washing up, and changing his clothes, Jason left the tent and entered the 1-star Plains Wild Zone once again. The increase of one's strength caused by the novice rank was minuscule, but Jason still felt much stronger today. One could say that the wild beast and novice ranks were not even the beginning of one's journey in the vast world, as each increase in level gave only slight enhancements in strength. If Jason had a soul bond like Greg, he would bash up all wild ranked beasts without any problems, but that wasn't the case, unfortunately. Almost a month passed since Greg formed his soul bond, and the bull calf was most likely almost matured, with its strength at the later awakened rank or first evolved rank. The amplification the bull provided to Greg was definitely a few times larger than Artemis enhancement, even if Greg's soul would only give him 1% share. Even if Greg was at the first novice rank with the enhancement of a strong soul bond like the reinforced horned bull, he would be able to easily crush numerous wild beasts with only his physique. But luckily Jason didn't even think about that, otherwise, he might be extremely frustrated and demotivated. Strolling around the wild zone with his dagger firmly gripped, Jason felt lonely. To avoid that, he focused even more on his surroundings. Many groups of youths were fighting large groups of beasts, and Jason couldn't find any solo 5-star beasts, so he honed his dagger skills while fighting 3 and 4-star wild beasts. Until lunch, he hadn't found a single 5-star wild beast as he went back into the dome in order to practice his Heaven's Hell technique. Finishing lunch, Jason went out again straight into the wild zone where he saw a pack of 9 5-star greater horned wolves besieging a group of 4 youths that tried to get into the dome. Unfortunately, they were hindered by the beasts. Before Jason did something unnecessary, he activated his mana eyes to look if the group could handle the situation or if they needed his help. Upon inspecting the youths, he noticed that all of them were at the 7th novice rank, which was above average for their age, and they should be able to handle 1 5-star beast for each of them with their superior equipment and armor. However, Jason noticed something in particular. The equipment they wore was good but not extremely expensive, and even while being outnumbered, nobody pulled out a gun to save themselves. Thinking about the situation they were in, Jason concluded that they didn't own a mana gun or the ammunition was already used up, so he wanted to help them out. Maybe their martial art techniques were also not on par with the instinctive movements of a 5-star wild beast, but Jason wouldn't just watch someone dying in front of him. His heart began to thump loudly as he himself knew that this decision was probably dumb due to his low rank, but he couldn't just let his brethren die without even trying to help out. The wolves had almost surrounded the small youth group and a few already pounced at them when a black-haired golden-eyed youth appeared between 2 greater horned wolves that stood only 2 meters apart from each other. Jason had no time to hesitate as he used almost a quarter of his advanced mana to enhance his lower body. With his breathtaking speed, he appeared between 2 greater horned wolves that were unaware of his advancement. He enhanced his dagger with a layer of mana before stabbing out with it, drawing a clean cut at one of the wolves' throats before he pulled the dagger out with a smooth movement. Not a single noise except a loud thump left the dead wolf's body as blood spurted out of its wound as the large body fell on the side. But this wasn't all, as Jason's eyes brightened up when he spun around only to pierce the dagger into the bewildered greater horned wolf's neck, which caused a loud crack to resound through the whole battlefield. Because Jason enhanced his dagger with a layer of mana, the dagger's sharpness and firmness were enhanced and definitely strong enough to pierce through the cervical spine without many difficulties. Jason killed 2 5-star greater horned wolves without much difficulty due to his perfect assassination attempt. However, the battle was still not over as 7 greater horned wolves were still alive. And only 5 of them were already in a battle with the youths while another one was jumping into the fray. But one greater horned wolf noticed that 2 of its brethren were missing when it heard 2 loud noises only a second ago. Turning around, it saw the 2 dead wolves and a youth standing only a few meters away from itself, rushing at it with a fast speed. Looking at the black-haired youth with bloodstains on his face, the wolf went immediately into a rage before it saw the youth's deep golden glowing eyes. Its rage dissipated almost immediately without leaving any trace of it behind as the wolf's body began to shiver, looking into these cold golden eyes. The wolf was intimidated, and it felt as if the Grim Reaper knocked at its door welcoming it to the abyss. It wanted to retreat and run away from the youth as far as possible, but before it could even turn around, the youth was only a meter apart from it. Jason noticed the wolf's hesitation, but he wasn't sure why that was the case, as it was extremely unusual. Not caring about the situation, Jason used the newly obtained opening to slide under its stomach to avoid a sudden attack from its head. Its stomach was cleanly cut open and blood fountains and organs spilled out onto Jason, who jumped up after wiping his face. He had used up more than half of his mana and he supervised the battle of the 4 youths and remaining 6 greater horned wolves to help out if needed. It was seen as immoral to kill the prey of another person, and Jason provided only a little bit support. Only slightly more than 6 minutes later the last wolf was finally finished off. However, before that happened, Jason had already left the youths to pick up his 3 5-star wild beast corpses. He had killed them, so they belonged to him, while the youths didn't even think about taking them from him because they were grateful for his help. Jason wasn't really good with social interactions, and he left the youths after a short chat. The group of 4 youths mainly thanked Jason, and they wanted to give him something in return, but he declined politely before leaving the scene. Chapter 35 Time's Up by Hydesgrain. Jason went into the dome again, where he took out the 5-star corpses to take out their incomplete cores before storing them again. After replenishing his mana, he relaxed for a short time before he entered the wild zone again. It was only 1 p.m. and he had still roughly 24 hours left to improve his combat skills, experience and to earn a little pocket money, including cores for Artemis. While supervising the battle of the youth that were at least a year younger than him, Jason noticed that his combat abilities were already on par with them, but still not good enough. His familiarity with the dagger was already decent, while his innate combat ability was definitely above average. However, some things could only be learned through experience. Jason decided to hunt larger 2-star wild beasts groups in order to improve his observance ability by another notch, even if it was already above average. Fighting against 10 2-star wild beasts would be more difficult than fighting a small group of 4-star wild beasts or a single 5-star wild beast, except for their overwhelming strength. Jason had to be careful during his fights with either faction. Hours passed and he sustained only some small cuts after being overwhelmed by numerous beasts, but he prevented serious injuries by forming small layers of mana around the spot that were attacked. It was almost dark when he came back to his tent, where Jason did his daily routine, including the Heaven's Hell technique. He was quite happy as he had accomplished his designated task faster than expected. After writing a short message to Greg, he went into his sleeping bag and fell into a dreamless sleep. Before the first sunlight lightened up the plains, Jason was woken up by an overwhelming feeling of happiness when he felt something fluffy on his face. Knowing that it was Artemis, he immediately opened his eyes and cuddled with her for a few minutes before he stood up. Her injury was already completely healed, which made Jason happy. Furthermore, sensing the constant increase of mana inside her blood, Jason began to ponder if he should give her some more incomplete beast cores or not. He had many lefts, but he wasn't sure when he would be able to enter the wild zone again to farm more, and there was a small problem. He had only around 20,000 credits left and many beast corpses to sell, but with Artemis' insatiable hunger, Jason would need to have a talk with Greg later. Greg told him that school would start in around 2 weeks, and Jason wasn't exactly sure how long their trip to the designated city would take. Jason knew that they had to travel for quite some time to reach the A-grade city, because they avoided dangerous magic beast zones. The time they needed to travel from their C-grade city to Syro would be at least 4 days with a decent vehicle. Maybe Jason could enter the wild zone for the remaining 10 days to hunt 3- and 4-star beasts for their cores. Thinking about his shortage of money, or more likely lack of incomplete cores, Jason entered the Soul World to complete his Heaven's Hell training before he went into the Plains wild zone with Artemis circling above him. When it was 11 a.m., Jason entered the dome again to dismantle his tent and store it away. Afterward, the previously ordered shuttle arrived, which Jason entered, with its final destination at the Flay family mansion. It would take around 40 minutes, and decided to practice the Heaven's Hell technique again as his soul energy was already replenished. The pain after practicing the Heaven's Hell technique was still horrifying, but somehow Jason grew used to it over the last 2 weeks. Arriving at the address Greg told him, Jason noticed that he entered the Noble District, which was directly next to the center area, where the government, important companies, the Beast Pagoda, and large shopping centers were situated. He saw huge yards with many exotic plants and flowers all around the district, causing Jason to feel astonished, as he could see mana radiating from some of these plants. Overall, one could say that the yard radiated dense mana that was even better than the mana outside the dome within the 1-star wild zone. The Noble District wasn't even remotely comparable to the outer areas of the city, as the Flay family's yard had probably more than enough space to construct a few skyscrapers on it where tens of thousands of tenants could live in. Looking around, Jason saw a 3-story tall mansion in the center of the plot, built with white marble and many other exquisite materials. Calculating the prices of the materials and the cost for the plot, including the unknown plants, Jason's heart ached. For normal people, it wasn't even possible to purchase a plot inside C-grade cities. One would need to be nobility or earned glory points, which were equivalent to humanity's achievements in order to receive the permission to purchase land or larger property. While Jason admired the gigantic yard and the luxurious-looking mansion, the doors were opened by a young long brown-haired girl who was probably slightly older than him. She looked at him with a slightly cold face which surprised Jason a little bit. Wearing a white summer dress, she looked incredibly beautiful, but Jason knew who she was. It was Greg's sister Malia, and Jason sensed that she didn't like him as she avoided to have eye contact with him while trying to look cool-headed. He wasn't sure why she avoided him, but she came slowly closer, gesturing him to follow her. She didn't even say hello, and Jason thought back at the time of Greg's soul awakening when she had to step back with a terrified expression after looking into his eyes from a very close distance. Never mind, maybe she is shy or something like that. Jason didn't worry about it, and he disregarded any ill intention, as he wasn't aware of the shock he brought Malia. Jason's senses didn't betray him as Malia was truly scared to look into his eyes. She remembered clearly how intimidated she was when she looked into his deep, cold golden eyes, and Malia was scared to get devoured if she dared to look into them once again. But even so, she was too prideful to say something like that out loud, so she had to keep a calm expression in front of him. Jason followed Malia quietly, and both of them didn't say a single word, which caused an awkward atmosphere around them. However, after entering the mansion, he was way too fascinated about the furniture and interior of the mansion that he completely disregarded the awkward atmosphere and Malia's fear. They kept walking for some time until he saw a familiar youth sitting on a couch inside a huge living room. The whole living room was probably a few times bigger than a basketball field, and Jason wondered why someone needed so much space. Seeing Jason, Greg jumped up as he walked fast but steady towards him. Jason noticed that Greg's muscles became more apparent and firmer while he grew at least a few centimeters in size. One could say that Greg was already a walking bodybuilder, and Jason admired his nice body. One could see through the clothes. Greeting each other with a firm handshake, Jason also scanned Greg's mana core, only to get shocked by what he saw. Not only did his rank increase from the 2nd adept rank to the 3rd adept rank within a few weeks, but his mana core size also grew by a noticeable size. Greg was still at the lower levels of the adept rank and not an intermediate adept, but with his amplification from his soul bond, he would probably be on par with an average 4th adept rank. That would be a great achievement, and Jason felt happy for Greg. Calculating that the bull calf grew up to be a low-evolved beast until now and shared around 5%-10% of its strength, if not more. As such, it was only natural that Greg's mana core would also grow. Evolved ranked beasts were comparable to human expert ranks, and 5%-10% was already comparable to at least one, more likely 2 adept levels. Taking another glance at Greg's mana core, it was more likely that Greg received a 10% plus share, which caused Jason to nod approving, as Greg's soul gave him a good quote. But it was still not comparable to his own 30+% shared amount he received from his still incomplete soul world. Greg saw Jason's golden eyes shining lightly, and when Jason said, "Congratulations," he began to smile lightly. Loosening up their handshake, Greg looked directly into Jason's eyes, and Malia, who saw this, tensed up subconsciously, thinking about the worst-case scenario, which didn't happen. Greg noticed a white fluffy ball on Jason's shoulder that suddenly began to move. Opening her eyes, Artemis' black button-like eyes gazed at Greg, who stepped back surprised. Chapter 36, Artemis Pride by Hydesgrain. Calming down, Greg seized Artemis from head to talon, when his gaze returned back to Jason, rather confused. "Jason, is this your soul bond? A snowflake owl? Isn't that a little bit too weak?" Somehow Greg felt disappointed. He hoped that Jason would find a good 1-star wild beast to form a contract with, but snowflake owls were weak in their overall combat strength, while their speed was exceptional fast. In comparison to other 1-star wild beasts, their strength was way too weak without even considering their non-existent potential. Jason understood Greg's concern and he wanted to clarify the situation at least a little bit to him, when Artemis suddenly cried out, visibly outraged, flapping her wings violently. How dared this small fellow antagonize her strength and beauty? Closing parenthesis ellipsis dot. Calm down, Artemis. He doesn't mean it like that. Jason tried to calm Artemis down and it took him a few minutes before she squeezed herself back on his shoulder. Greg didn't care about Artemis' outrage, but Malia, who was standing quietly behind, noticed something, which shocked her. She couldn't help but ask curiously, can she understand human language? That's not possible for 1-star wild beasts! Exclamation mark. Is her brain somehow mutated or something similar like that? Coming closer to the two youths, she even forgot to be wary of Jason, as she had always been curious about beasts. Her family were well-known beast merchants, and they also caught some beasts for other nobles in order to gain their favors, large sums of credits, or rare items, and it was important to know what kind of beasts were rare. Furthermore, it was necessary to figure how to detect advantageous and adverse mutations of beasts in the wilderness due to minute details. Potential was everything in this business, and catching a beast with more potential would give them more credits, increasing their bounty. While her parents were really good at finding potential beasts, she wasn't as good as her parents. Malia was only 16 years old and still learning a lot about beasts. There was more than enough time for her to catch up with her parents' knowledge, and seeing Jason's soul bond, she had to grow curious. Jason was astonished and looked at Artemis, asking himself if she learned human language. But that shouldn't be the case, as there weren't enough instances where Jason talked to someone in her presence. Artemis looked at Jason knowingly as she transmitted through the soul bond that she could understand the rough meaning of everything said because of their connection. Without Jason hearing the conversation, she wouldn't understand anything at all. Turning his head to Malia, he answered her question while looking into her big brown eyes. She can't understand the human language. Throughout our connection, she can comprehend the meaning of Greg's word. Malia tensed up for a second when their eyes met, but she noticed that his eyes weren't intimidating this time. This caused her tension to loosen up slightly, and she looked a little bit longer into Jason's eyes that looked somewhat gentle and full of warmth now. Beautiful, blushing, she turned away her head slightly and continued questioning, somehow shy, but she is still very intelligent and underwent an advantageous mutation, right? Quote. Jason was standing between Malia and Greg, and both looked at him full of expectations. Malia was curious, and the red color of her cheeks receded slowly to her normally fair skin as she looked expectant at him, while Greg also grew curious after listening to their conversation. Looking at Greg, he began to defend Artemis with confidence, saying, "First of all, Greg, you might be right about normal snowflake owls, but Artemis is special and not weak, okay? Your control over mana should be precise enough to sense the strength of wild beasts and novice ranks, or am I wrong? Shouldn't that be the first thing to do when you meet someone new? And with that, you should have already known that Artemis is a 2-star wild beast." Jason felt proud and at the same time as a teacher, because neither Malia nor Greg had scanned Artemis' mana fluctuations, as both were sure about her being a weak 1-star wild beast. Both were instantly embarrassed because their parents lectured them about the same thing before: never underestimate anyone, never forget to find out who the person opposite you is and how strong she is, knowledge is power, never let your guard down when you are with people you don't trust 100%, and so on. But that was not the shocking part. What confused them the most was the last sentence Jason said, and both immediately released some of their mana in order to scan Artemis thoroughly. Huh. How? Quote. Unbelievable. Sensing Artemis' mana fluctuations at the 2-star wild beast rank caused both of them to look at Jason with an open jaw. In his opinion, both looked extremely foolish, causing him to smile lightly. Jason felt Artemis's confidence soaring, and her pride overwhelmed his feeling as his facial features turned slowly into one of pride. It was the first time for Jason that he was influenced by the emotions of his soul bond. With pride it was fine, but was if this would happen with bloodlust or lust? Jason wasn't sure how he could handle it, while it was definitely something nice to share with positive emotions. Opening his mouth, he turned to Malia. Your name was Malia, right? I hope you don't mind me calling you by your name. To get back to your question about her having an advantageous mutation. It's pretty obvious that she underwent a mutation, or at least that she isn't an ordinary snowflake owl, but, to be honest, she was labeled as an adverse mutated snowflake owl with a high chance of being born with a disease like blindness and so on, which was the reason she wasn't noticed by others. But as you can see, she is healthy and even stronger than normal snowflake owls, as her problem was fortunately rather easily solved. Except her gluttony. Jason sighed inwardly. Greg listened to Jason quietly thinking about something, while Malia was deep in thoughts, scanning through Artemis as if she was a memory stick. It made Artemis feel uncomfortable and she hid behind Jason. Malia averted her gaze when she noticed that Jason finished his speech. Jason called her by her first name, which she didn't notice at first. During the Mana outbreak, many cultures appeared and vanished, while some traditions were mixed with others. And one of society's unlisted laws was to speak politely to prodigies and nobles, which included calling someone by the family name. After she finished her deep thoughts, she only began to truly understand that a man, except her brother and father, called her by her first name, which hasn't happened since her soul awakening, and she was about to get angry when their eyes met. Her rage subsided and she couldn't even think about becoming angry, and she immediately changed the theme back to Artemis as a thought entered her mind. Well, it's fine, but wait. Why did you pick an adverse mutated one-star beast? I saw your soul awakening and your chances to get another beast with your soul energy were minuscule in the short term. You might be lucky, but wasn't that too risky? She was way too confused about the weird but good-looking youth in front of her, causing her to ask straightforwardly. Greg had the same thought, and he also exclaimed loud, after hearing his sister talking about that. Yeah! Why did you pick an adverse labeled beast as your soul bond? Wasn't that too naive? He roared out vigorously. Greg! You should be the last person to say something like that. Haven't we already talked about that with you? You're the most foolish in our whole family. The rage just came out of Malia as she noticed his brother talking about naivety while he himself picked a verified weaker beast as his soul bond just because Jason told him so. Luckily, the non-elemental bull calf had a hidden and sealed bloodline of a lesser Minotaur race, which was a strong bipedal beast. Malia and her parents didn't believe that Jason knew about that and only thought of this as a lucky encounter, as they scolded Greg a lot. Greg began to pout, which looked extremely ugly, and Jason thought that he would begin to sob any moment when Greg suddenly shouted out, "How can you say that?" Taurus is much better than your first soulbond. You're just jealous. Quote. Greg! Malia turned red from rage. Jason thought it was funny to see the sister pair clashing with each other, and it took them quite a while before they calmed down. Malia and Greg had completely forgotten about Jason's existence. When they saw him smiling happily at him, they felt embarrassed. It had been a long time since he had been happy while being with others except for Artemis. Thinking about the last time he had been with others, Jason noticed that he never had a friend except his mother. Are they my friends? Scratching his head awkwardly, Jason was also slightly embarrassed. However, it would be more embarrassing if he asked them if they were his friends now, so he avoided this question. Jason didn't know what to say right now, and the whole situation was awkward. Clearing his throat, he asked, "Where are your parents? I have to show them that I've accomplished my task." He tried to change the subject with this, and technically it was the only reason he came to the mansion. Somehow, they changed subjects since the beginning without considering even the reason for them to talk about the main subject. Malia regained her senses before Greg and sat up with a straight back before saying seriously, "They're outside catching a certain magical beast, but I'm not sure when they'll be back. My mom gave me the responsibility to look after your task. I should only report your rank including soul bond and so on to them." Before Jason could say anything else, Malia looked into his eyes, without being scared anymore when she asked seriously, "Can you show me the 5 5-star corpses or the awakened beast corpse, please? My mom told me to record everything to review it for herself." Chapter 37 Duel by Hydesgrain. Taking out the 3 greater horned wolf carcasses, the vulture carcass, and the mutated black-horned bison carcass, Malia began her inspection carefully. Her mother told Malia that she had to be strict and careful because she wasn't sure if Jason wouldn't cheat. Purchasing a 5-star wild beast carcass wasn't difficult, and the first thing Marley noticed upon starting the inspection was that 4 out of 5 carcasses were killed with a single strike. Only the vulture had a few more cuts and a larger wound at its wing. After seeing that, she thought for a moment before she decided to scan Jason's mana core rank, which left her baffled for a second as she regaining her senses. Looking at Jason, she asked with a serious face but slightly hesitant, "You are only at the 4th novice rank, and you want me to believe that you defeated 5 5-star wild beasts?" According to the wounds, most wild beasts were killed with a single dagger thrust. I believe you don't have any evidence that you killed them, right? Greg's eyes widened, and he pulled himself from the bottom he was still lying on. Standing up within a moment, he looked at Jason carefully. "Well, you're already at the 4th novice rank, that's pretty fast," Greg said while smiling at him. Malia looked at Greg as if he was the dumbest person she had ever seen, and she about to throw a fist at him when Greg continued, "Didn't you break into the 2nd novice rank on the exam day?" "You're pretty fast, haha." She was way too confused to understand anything. How could an almost 14-year-old youth only be at the 2nd novice rank on the exam day? That meant Jason's mana control and sensitivity should be awful, as he should only be able to sense mana for a short time. However, considering the fact that he improved his level by 2 in such a short time told her that Jason was stuck at the 1st or 2nd novice rank due to a different reason. Jason noticed her perplexed gaze, and her eyes turned almost into question marks as he answered her unspoken question. "I can sense mana since a long time ago, but I couldn't improve my mana core rank due to personal reasons. Only approximately a week before the exams started, I was able to improve my mana core, which results in my weak rank." Clearing his throat, Jason added, "And you asked if I have some evidence. Unfortunately not. The only thing I have is a small injury on my back from the vulture. While I fought head-on with the vulture, the other 4 beasts were all ambushed by me with a grade 1 jade iron dagger." Finishing his explanation, he took out his dagger that was still a little bit stained with blood from his morning hunt. Malia was deep in thoughts, pondering what to do as she decided to let her thoughts out loud without holding back. "To be honest, I'm not sure if you're really able to defeat a 5-star wild beast, but the more confusing for me is the question, why exactly my parents tried to help you to enter the affiliated school of the Vanguard School in Syro City. They owe you a favor, but that could have been solved with credits or through other ways. My mother said something about your eyes, and I understand her slightly as I feel something weird about them, but considering your rank and your soul bond's strength, it would be almost impossible for you to survive in any of the affiliated Vanguard schools. Furthermore, our reputation will be stained once other nobles find out that we let someone as weak as you into one of Asterix's most prosperous schools," Malia said, feeling somehow unsettled. She didn't think Jason was lying, but assassinating a 5-star wild beast shouldn't be that easy for Jason, and killing it with a single dagger thrust even less. Except his combat prowess was much higher than his rank. Considering what Jason's background told her, he was extremely poor, without anyone that could teach him about martial arts, and Malia didn't know what to do. "I'll report everything to my mother and let her decide the matter, okay?" She ended her speech and tried to show her cold face, but Jason and Greg noticed her being uncertain. Greg had always been uncomfortable with anyone except his own family since elementary school, as many parents told their children to befriend him because of their parents' business and wealth. In the beginning, everything was fine until one day when a boy clashed with Greg that the whole show was blown off. The boy who clashed with Greg told him that everyone was after his parents' wealth and not a single friend of his was real. The young Greg didn't believe it at first, but looking at the other children's innocent faces that didn't even try to deny it was devastating to the young Greg. Some of them even acknowledged this cruel fact without hesitation, which changed his mind. Getting to know that he was only befriended because of their own parents told him to, shocked him, causing his mental health to suffer. Greg, faced with the cruel facts, couldn't help but feel left alone since then. It took him a long time to even talk to his family, as he blamed them for being rich. But what could his parents do about it? They moved into a different city where Greg entered middle school, but he didn't make a single friend. He became a loner that ignored everyone's approach, seeing them as frauds before even getting to know them. After some time, Greg noticed a blind youth sitting next to him in class, silently listening to the lectures, focusing solely on school. He didn't mind envious classmates bullying him or treating him like trash because of his perfect grades. Somehow, Greg grew comfortable around Jason with time passing, and he took care of the bullies while asking Jason for advice about certain subjects once in a while. Jason answered them diligently, but he didn't care about Greg's existence more than necessary. This made Greg somewhat happy, and he began to secretly see the blind youth as a friend while Jason himself wasn't aware of that. Jason thought that it was a coincidence that his classmates stopped bullying him as Greg sat next to him in school. He answered Greg's question because of gratitude towards him, but that was it. Malia thought about Greg's situation, which was the reason for her wavering eyes, as she was happy that her brother finally found a friend. Even if she wasn't happy when Jason told Greg to pick a different soul bond, in the end it was fortunately that Greg listened to Jason, which was all that mattered. Their parents were also concerned about Greg, and she hoped that they were as expectant about Jason as she was. It was the second time that Greg noticed something different about his sister, and both times were about Jason, so he drew his own conclusion. "Whoa, sis!" Exclamation mark. "Why are your eyes wavering? Do you want Jason to follow us to school?" Question mark. "Do you LO versus?" Before he could end his sentence, a small ball of water blew Greg away a few meters. "You are embarrassing." "It's not like that, idiot." Operator. Operator. Jason thought they were playing again, so he didn't mind their words. But upon noticing the strength of the small water ball, he was astonished and extremely terrified. This unstable-looking water ball had the strength to blow away a third adept rank with a physical first soul bond that was probably already at the low evolved stage, without much difficulty. "Malia, if your mother doesn't believe me about my capabilities, can you ask her if I can hunt another 5-star wild beast while recording it?" Jason smiled gently, trying to cover his insecurity. Greg's sister looked feeble and beautiful, but behind this facade was a ferocious monster, and Jason was a little bit timid about her wrathful outbursts. Malia seemed to be at least at the expert rank, if not higher, but he couldn't really read her mana core rank, as he had never seen something comparable. She seemed to have a higher mana core than the teachers he had seen so far, but her parents and the old man were still a lot stronger. Jason still asked Malia for the small favor if her mother didn't believe him. He wished to enter a high school in an A-grade city, as the mana density there should be multiple times higher, while instructors could help Jason with his martial arts. Many resources would be provided against school merit points that wouldn't be sold to commoners without any achievements or a vast amount of credits. Other than that, many other benefits could be gained through schools. Greg's family was his only way, but there wasn't anything he could do once his mother rejected him. Even so, Jason was already grateful for the opportunity he received, as well as the permission to the Heaven's Hell technique they gave him. If he was honest, Jason didn't think he deserved this chance, as he only told Greg to pick a different beast as the first soul bond out of his gut feeling. He could see the radiating color of the ball, but why should he care about someone he wasn't even close with? Or were they close? Jason wasn't sure about that. Social interactions were still new to him, and he didn't know when exactly one could call someone else acquaintance, friend, or even close friend. Jason stored the carcasses away after Malia finished her inspection. After that, she wrote a detailed report to her mother. Thinking that he should go home, Jason wanted to stand up, when Greg stopped him. Greg wanted to talk to him a little bit more about Syro City, the Vanguard School, and so on, so he stopped in his tracks. Hours passed and Jason left the Flays mansion after the three of them finished their talk. Getting to know more about the affiliated schools of the Vanguard School, Jason was at first excited and then he grew more and more serious until he once understood something. He was pitifully weak. Chapter 38 Determined. Greg told Jason much information about the Vanguard associated schools. The Vanguard School itself was a huge school, accepting the best students all over the Asterix. It was seen as one of the 3 best schools on the island and everyone wanted to enter it, but only the best out of the best could enter it. One would need to have a high mana core rank, exceptional theoretical knowledge and high rating in one's soul awakening. Malia was also a student in the Vanguard School, and she was at home due to the summer vacations and Greg's soul awakening. While Greg's mana core rank and theoretical knowledge exam were not up to the requirement, his 4-star soul awakening gave him some extra points, causing his lack in theoretical knowledge and mana core rank to get neglected. 4-star soul awakenings were extremely rare and each year there would only be around 10 4-star soul awakenings on Asterix, which would already be considered a fortunate year. The Vanguard School accepted more than 10,000 students each year and it was only normal for Greg to be accepted. Nevertheless, it surprised Jason that Greg's mana core rank did not meet the requirement, which means that he could only enter the school because of his high-star soul awakening. To enter one of the affiliated schools one had to reach the 3rd adept rank, have extreme high exam results, at least a 2.5-star soul awakening, or a 2-star soul awakening with at least one extraordinary good characteristic in one's soul awakening, either soul energy or a unique soul. Jason wasn't even close to one of these requirements except his soul awakening, as his soul was the most unique soul ever awoken in his opinion. Even so, he didn't want to expose that, which means Jason met not a single requirement. He wasn't even close to them as his exam results were extremely bad because of his non-existent combat prowess at that time, and his mana core rank is still shit compared to the requirement. Jason was a little bit frustrated, and even if he was allowed to attend one of the affiliated schools because of the nobility rights Greg's family obtained, he would be the weakest with a large gap between him and the second worst student. He was grateful that the Flay family allowed him to study there, but he felt too weak and pitiful at the moment, and Jason left the shuttle he subconsciously entered after he went out of the mansion. Jason wasn't scared about being bullied, rather it was more likely that he would be thrown out after the first year because of his grades, which hurt his almost non-existent pride. If one couldn't accomplish the given assignments or get enough merit points by the end of the year, one would be kicked out of the school, which was Jason's biggest problem. These assignments ranged from killing late awakened beasts as one of the easier assignments to gathering herbs in 3 or 4-star wild zones that have evolved and unblemished ranked beasts. Jason couldn't even think about killing the weakest awakened beasts, as they were a few times stronger than the strongest 5-star wild beast. Assassinating an awakened beast would also be difficult, as its instincts and reaction speed were much stronger compared to wild beasts. Inside his apartment, Jason practiced the Heaven's Hell technique before he came to a decision. He had to close the gap between him and the other students as fast as possible, and Jason had 2 ways to accomplish this. Either he had to increase his mana core rank with the support of mana stones, which would hasten up his advancement speed by a few times and stabilize the core afterwards with certain medical solutions. Another path could be to increase Artemis rank in order to improve their combat prowess, as Jason would receive 30% from Artemis Strength Amplified. Jason had another way to improve his strength, but the chances of success were too minuscule. He could form contracts with a few one-star wild beasts with at least some potential and force their evolution, but this could hurt his soul world core if a soul bond rejected him or breaks out of the contract once the particular beast's soul energy became higher than the contractor's. It would be better for him to increase his soul energy slowly for the time being, while relying on Artemis, who he trusted. Once he had some space left for another soul bond, he would search for one with high potential. The problem for the first two solutions, however, was what Jason didn't have: something particular. Credits. With enough credits, Jason could purchase all necessary resources including beast cores for Artemis, but unfortunately, he had only 20,000 credits left. He was already very happy about his current situation because Greg told him that he didn't have to pay a single credit for accommodation or tuition fees as he would live with them. And their house was supposed to be close to both schools, while the nobility rights they used included the tuition fees for Greg. As such, Jason didn't have to pay anything to get educated and to furthermore stay alive. Nobles could normally only use their nobility rights for their own children, but this was changed since many nobles complained about it. One could use the nobility rule one time for every child they bear, not a single time more. The Flay family haven't used any of their nobility rights for schoolings as their children were blessed with a high talent. Jason wasn't sure why this nobility rule was so like that, but he didn't mind it as he received benefits from it. One shouldn't complain while receiving benefits. There was a way for Jason to earn many credits, but this would mean he had to expose his secret, which he didn't want to do. At least not too many people should know about it. Making up his mind, he purchased a few things through his quantum bracelet, emptying his whole fortune. Left behind was only a big $12 in his bank account, and he forced to smile. The parcel would arrive the next morning. Jason washed and changed his clothes before feeding Artemis a few beast cores. Lying inside the bed, Jason was still thinking about some possibilities before the darkness swallowed him. Artemis woke up Jason as soon as she digested the beast cores, which was earlier than early, and Jason noticed that he had to give her a lot more cores so he could at least sleep a few hours a day. It was only 2 a.m. but Artemis was awake, and Jason didn't want to sleep anymore, so he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique. Jason noticed that the more often he used this technique, the faster he became with it. What astonished him the most was that the speed his soul energy replenished as it changed to a minuscule, almost no noticeable degree. At least that was what Jason felt, but he wasn't really sure about that. However, Jason noticed that the moment his soul energy increased, or rather the moment his soul world core generated more soul energy, his soul world also changed slightly. It was only minuscule and probably less than 0.0001%, but Jason felt it, and the change took also place in the shared amount Artemis gave him and their soul connection. This made him happy, but he cleared his mind and opened the holographic screen of his quantum bracelet. Requesting his parcel to arrive directly, a drone arrived only 20 minutes later with a big parcel below. Opening the parcel, many items entered his view. Chapter 39: Preparing for the Hunt. Looking inside the parcel, Jason began to smile. There were a few long ropes, some yellow potion, a syringe with some green liquid inside, and miniature cage with a red button on it, a few dozen arrows, an ungraded bow and a weird-looking quiver. Taking out the bow, he tried to pull the string. It was difficult, but Jason would be able to pull the string back a few times in a row. The bow wasn't made by a craftsman master, rather an apprentice, but it was still fine as long as it did its job, and when he purchased the bow it was certified as an ungraded bow able to penetrate 3-star wild beast defenses, and its price range was 8,000 credits, which was fine. This was more than enough for his plan, and looking at the other materials like the ungraded ropes, enlarging miniature cage and the yellow ungraded paralysis potion followed by the green syringe, Jason thought that he was extremely smart. While the potions were already expensive, the most expensive was the enlarging miniature cage with an equal price to the bow he bought. The arrows in the parcel were simply made and nothing special, so Jason stored them away immediately. Looking at the other items for some time, he stored them away and decided to go to the archery centrum in the city with a shuttle. Using 10 out of his remaining 12 credits, he entered his shooting range where he could train his archery skills for 2 hours. It was early in the morning, and nobody trained one's archery skill at 2 a.m., which was also the cause for the cheap renting price. Taking out his bow and arrows, Jason had to get a feeling for his bow. The target was 20 meters away and it shouldn't be a problem for him to hit it. Or so he thought. Jason took more than 4 shots to hit the target for his first time, even if it were the outer circles, but after that he began to get a feeling for the distance and the amount he had to pull back. After every 5 to 10 shoots, Jason had to stop for a moment to regain some stamina, as it was harder to pull the string back each time. 2 hours passed without notice and Jason was notified to leave the shooting range. It was 4:30 a.m. and Jason wanted to leave for the Plains Wild Zone when he noticed that he couldn't even afford a shuttle right now. Thinking about a solution, Jason thought about the beast corpses he had, and he decided to go to the merchant shops, which were only a short walk away from the archery centrum. Walking for 30 minutes, Jason saw a big, luxurious-looking skyscraper with a golden koi as a sign. It was the Golden Koi shop, which mainly purchased beast carcasses to sell certain parts to butchers, artisans, restaurants, craftsmen and so on. Entering the building through the large automatic front doors, Jason was in a huge hall made out of marble and other exquisite materials. The hall was at least 10 meters high and a few hundred square meters in size, while 4 big pillars were situated in a square around the elevator, which stood in the middle. Between each pillar was a reception and a large, weird-looking machine with a big holographic screen in front of it. 2 options could be seen on the holographic screen, one labeled with "sell" and another one with the label "purchase". Standing in front of the machine, Jason only knew roughly what to do, as he had never done something like that before. Clicking on the sell option for another few options appeared with the different ranks of beasts, from wild beast to evolved beast. Every day a few thousand beasts' carcasses would be sold at the Golden Koi shop, and they invented this weird-looking machine for the hunter without much time. Operated by an AI, the price for common beasts was integrated into the data, and on rare beasts at the evolved stage could be more expensive than the registered price from the company. Jason clicked on wild beasts and a message appeared on the beast dealer. He called it himself. It had a different name, but Jason didn't like high technology Betrama, Beast Trading Machine, V3.7. Inserting the beast carcasses in small groups of 5 into the big mouth of the machine, they landed on a small table where they were scanned by the AI. The holographic screen calculated the credits for each beast, and it took around 10 minutes until Jason had inserted every beast carcass. Because it was only 5 a.m., the whole hall was empty without any workers, as the usual working hours began at 7 a.m. and Jason had enough time, so he didn't feel pressured by the crowds of humans which were normally inside this main hall. Jason was still relatively uncomfortable with huge crowds of people, but he became better with small groups thanks to Greg and Malia. He was comfortable with them, and Greg was also the one who told Jason that he could enter some shops before the regular opening hours to sell his carcasses. Looking at the list of beasts, he noticed that there were more beasts' carcasses than he thought. 153x Wild Beasts Corpse Right Pointing Arrow 3 credits carcass. 67x Wild Beasts Corpse Right Pointing Arrow 7 credits carcass. 24x Wild Beasts Corpse Right Pointing Arrow 14 credits carcass. 4x Wild Beasts Corpse Right Pointing Arrow 21 credits carcass. 1x, Wind, Elemental Mutated Black Horned Bull Corpse Right Pointing Arrow 100 credits. Putting his arm with the quantum bracelet inside the opening port on the holographic screen appeared a message again. Transaction of 1448 credits can be done immediately. Execute transaction. Yes, no. Jason was astonished but clicked yes, and he got a notification on his bracelet that the transaction was done. He had never thought that he had hunted so many beasts, but thinking about it, he hunted inside the Plains Wild Zone for over 3 weeks, around 12 hours a day. Thinking about his loot, he took a look at his spatial storage and how many beast cores he had left. There were no 2 and 3 star cores, only a few 4-star cores left behind while even the 5-star cores were used up. Pondering if he should already purchase beast cores, Jason decided to wait until the evening after looking if his plan worked or not. Calling a shuttle with his new fortune, Jason was in front of the plane's wild zone less than an hour later. Looking at his messenger, he hoped that Greg or Malia messaged him about their parents' homecoming, but there was nothing. Jason hoped that their parents would be home soon, as he had to partly rely on them to execute his plan without exposing his secret, but it didn't matter at the moment. Entering the plane's wild zone with the first sunlight, he was expectant. With a bow in one hand and the quiver with the dagger secured at his belt while the dagger was inside an ugly-looking scabbard, Jason strolled around the wild zone. The quiver was filled with his arrows, and they were coated with the paralysis potion. This paralyzing potion wasn't strong but effective against weak wild beasts, and Jason bought it exactly for this reason. Hours passed and Jason hasn't hunted a single beast until he sighted something in the afternoon. A grin appeared on Jason's face. Found you. Chapter 40 Lucky Catch. Jason looked at a large pack of 2-star scaled wolves and smiled brightly. The pack had at least 15 scaled wolves, but Jason only looked at a certain wolf which was larger compared to its brethren. Its scales looked tougher, and they shined brighter, but the most important fact was the color the scaled wolf radiated. While its brethren didn't even radiate a color, this one wolf, in particular, radiated a light gray color, and Jason knew from his own experience in the Beast Pagoda that this light gray meant its potential was at the evolved rank. Jason had never imagined that he would find such a treasure in a 1-star wild zone. Smiling from ear to ear, Jason took out an arrow, and it was now time to hunt a large group of scaled wolves. He knew that his bow would only be able to shoot arrows that were able to pierce through the scales slightly, but this would be enough as his arrows were coated in the paralysis potion he purchased previously. Jason was not a good archer, as today was his first time to even hold a bow, but after he noticed that his eyes remembered roughly the height he had to take to hit a target 20 meters away, he became confident. The pack of scaled wolves hadn't noticed Jason until now, and it was time for him to get closer. Luckily there were some bushes that were quite helpful for him to prevent him from getting detected before he even took action, and Jason slowly approached the pack of wolves which were eating some beast corpses or something like that. Hiding behind the closest bush to the wolf pack, Jason had to decide which wolf to attack first, and he made up his mind after a short moment before he pulled back the bowstring with the coated arrow already laid on. A whir could be heard, and the big wolf with the light gray mana radiating felt a sting at its shoulder before it felt his body almost instantly numbing. Luckily these wolves were only 2-star wild beasts, and the paralysis potion was potent enough to numb the stronger wolf for a certain amount of time. Jason didn't stop after shooting his first arrow, and he shot another 3 arrows before he was even detected by the other wolves. 11 scaled wolves were still able to fight, and they stormed at Jason with bloodthirsty eyes as this unknown enemy had attacked the brethren. They didn't know what was going on with their brethren, but it wasn't anything good, so they are naturally enraged. Without thinking they stormed at Jason, whose quiver and bow vanished into thin air. Taking out his dagger, there was already coated in a yellow liquid that dropped out of the scabbard. Jason only bought the liquid-proof scabbard for this scenario as there was no time for him to coat his dagger during the fight, and he didn't want to waste too much of his potion. With his dagger in his hand and a 2-star Artemis high in the sky, Jason felt confident. Using a small amount of mana to enhance his lower body, he increased his speed to a certain extent. It was marginal, and without a movement technique this enhancement was extremely restricted, but it was still better than nothing. He could maintain this for around 3 minutes until his mana was dried out, but these 3 minutes would be more than enough to kill 11 2-star wild beasts with the help of Artemis. While Jason spun around the group of 2-star scaled wolves, he inflicted small injuries that were enough for the potent paralysis potion to activate and numb his opponents. Artemis finished off the paralyzed wolves before distracting the surviving wolves. Jason was only slightly slower than the scaled wolves, but he was more flexible and had it much easier to make use of his body. Being bipedal was also advantageous, and the whole battle was finished quickly while Artemis finished off each of the scaled wolves without leaving any of them alive, even if they were unable to defend themselves, which surprised Jason slightly. He didn't think that Artemis was so cruel, and Jason wanted to let them alive. Artemis noticed his hesitation and transmitted an image of him getting pounced by one of these wolves once they regained control over their body. It was clear what she meant. These wolves wouldn't leave Jason alive and be grateful for him letting them survive either. Rather, it would end up the other way around, and they would attack him to avenge their brethren, or maybe to follow their wild instincts. Thinking about getting backstabbed by the ones he left alive, Jason shuddered before he regained his focus. Looking at the scaled wolf in front of him, the larger scaled wolf replied to his gaze with wrath and rage, which Jason to sigh as he took out a green syringe. Inside the syringe was a sleeping solution, and he injected it into the wolf, which was still unable to move freely. Jason had still around half of his mana reserves left, and he wasn't scared about getting attacked as he was relatively close to the dome, and even if some beast attacked him, the potent paralysis potion was even slightly useful against 4-star wild beasts. They would still be able to move, but a feeling of numbness would hinder their movements slightly. Waiting for the sleeping solution to kick in, Jason took care of every scaled wolf corpse, and finally the scaled wolf was tired and fell asleep. This sleeping solution was potent and would last a few hours even for 5-star wild beasts, so Jason wasn't scared about getting attacked by the scaled wolf. Lifting up the large wolf body wasn't easy, but once its body was laid over Jason's shoulder, it was much easier for him to move. Using some mana to reinforce himself, his steps got steadier, and 30 minutes later he reached the dome. Before going through the dome, he had to use the enlarging miniature cage he bought. Lying down the sleeping scaled wolf, he took out the miniature cage and pressed the red button before throwing the cage slightly in front of him. Clatter, clatter, clatter. After some loud rattle noises, Jason saw the miniature cage enlarging, and it looked somehow extremely satisfying. Inserting some wild beast cores to recharge the cage, he put the scaled wolf inside. Luckily the cage had some wheels below, otherwise, Jason wouldn't be able to move around the cage, and Jason entered the dome without it attacking the scaled wolf inside the cage. It was only fortunate that Jason bought this cage, as it was a necessity for beast merchants and hunters who tried their luck with catching some beasts. Seeing these cages around 1-star wild zones wasn't common, and Jason attracted a lot of attention, which made him feel uncomfortable. Jason didn't mind others' opinions, but he still couldn't handle many people's gaze on him. While waiting for the special shuttle, he heard many people talking about him. Isn't that a scaled wolf inside the cage? Such a waste of time and credits. Finding a wild beast with potential is like searching for a needle in a hayball. Does he think beasts with high potential are commonly found like candy in a candy shop? Question mark. Question mark. Quote. Poor fellow, maybe he is desperate for money and thinks living wild beasts are worth a lot. Shouldn't someone enlighten him about his misunderstanding? It's too sad. People were talking about him, and most of them were youths, while only a few middle-aged bodyguards were looking at him with conflicted thoughts. They were also naive, but not as much as the black-haired youth in front of them. Jason tried his best to ignore the onlooking people, and he rejoiced when the large shuttle that looked almost like a pickup arrived. A metal arm lifted the cage into its loading area, and Jason left the onlookers alone. While the shuttle was bringing him to the city, Jason looked if he got a message from Greg or Malia. Both had messaged him. While their messages were different, the main points were the same. While Malia's messages were rather bad news, Greg asked him to come to their mansion as soon as possible while sugarcoating the reason with some nice words. Jason forced a smile and thought. They rejected me. Looking back at his catch, he tried his best to think positively. At least I can do some business with them.